Hi friends, this is Caitlin. Welcome to ScrapbookPal's YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be playing with the Pinkfresh Studio Handpicked Flowers combination set. So you can see from this back picture that this is a coordinating set that comes with a stamp, a very large stamp and multiple sentiments, and then the coordinating dies as well as a layering stencil set. So we're going to be ink blending those stencils with the brushes that are over on the right hand side, those 1/2 inch brushes, also from Pinkfresh Studios, and I absolutely love how this one turned out, guys. We are going to start with our main image. I'm stamping that down onto some white heavyweight cardstock, and I'm going to also stamp the sentiment, but we're not going to end up using this one. We're going to change it up to a colored one later. But I'm stamping out my main image in Catherine Pooler's Midnight Archival ink, which is a permanent black ink. And that way when we go to do our ink blending on top of this, none of that black is going to smear or move around at all. It's going to be locked in place. And then I'm just applying that nice even layer. And for my main inks that we're going to be using to blend, I'm also using Catherine Pooler. We're going to do the Luxe mini set. I just love the colors in that set, and I had to try out the minis. I have zero regrets, for the record. I'm going to stamp this main image out twice just to make sure that I get that really crisp image, really nice outline. The detail in this stamp set is absolutely amazing. I'm in love. And I love that the back of the packaging gives you this guide so that you have a good idea of where everything goes. And each of those stencils is marked with a number and the corners marked so that you can make sure everything is lined up. I added a piece of the Spellbinders Best Ever tape just so that I could tape my stencil in place and not have to worry about it shifting while I was doing my ink blending. So I did take my time making sure that each stencil was lined up, and then just pressing down on that left hand side so that my tape would adhere to it. I love these blending brushes, and now I'm going to just have one in there for each kind of color family, right? One for reds, one for oranges, yellows, greens down the line. But I'm starting out by going in with the Cranberry Fizz ink, and because this is my first time using the brushes and loading it up, you can see I'm stamping off a little bit, pouncing off a little bit of that ink over onto my scrap paper on the side. But as I get more comfortable with the amount of ink that's coming off of my brush, I won't be doing that as much. And my goal was to build up some dimension within each layer instead of just depending on the separate layers to create the dimension for me. So I did a nice light wash of this pink color across all of the flowers. Now I'm going back in to build up extra color on the edges of each image. And you can see when we remove that, how we already have some really nice shading going on that's going to give that extra pop to the card when it's finished. Lined up my second stencil, which I'm not actually sure if this is stencil number 2 technically in the set, but it's the second stencil we're using, and it's the one that lines up with the roses to add in that extra detail. So again, just taking my time lining it up, adhering it to that tape, and then this time I'm going to go in really heavy-handed and just fill in all of those areas, since that is going to be the darkest and most intense part of these flowers, where we want that really, really contrasting deep color. So I'll peel that section off, and then we'll get our next group of flowers lined up. I really wanted to play with a fun summer color scheme, so I decided for my second group of flowers to be a yellow and orange combination. So I'm going to go in with a fresh brush and start picking up that yellow color, and I'm going to do the same kind of technique where I'm going to create a really soft general wash of color over all of the flowers, and then I'm going to go back in with a heavier hand right around the edges to let that ink pile up around the outer edge of each stencil, and that's really going to give us that added depth. Now for this one, instead of using more yellow with the second stencil layer, we're going to be bringing in that flame orange color, and I really love how these all combine, but obviously you can use them however makes you happy or swap out whatever colors you want. After a while, my tape started sticking, like curling back and sticking to the paper. So instead of fighting it, I decided to go with it. And so I pushed my tape all the way to the back, let it be completely curled over. lined my stencil up and then unrolled it and stuck it back to the stencil from behind, and it worked perfectly. So if you ever get frustrated with your tape, keep that in mind. Make it work for you, not against you. Now I'm going in with that orange color that I was talking about. It's this really deep kind of burnty orange. I love it. And I think it just brings so much dimension to that yellow. And I really love that the center of those bigger flowers right in the middle of our bouquet now have that different color to pop against that yellow. Originally, I was planning on using 2 different shades of green, but I ended up only using this lighter limey green. That darker green is just going to go away in a minute. I lined up the leafy layers, there's 2 of them, and I did the exact same thing. So I'm going in and creating that wash of green color first, and then I'm going to go in and instead of creating extra shadow on all of the corners, I'm going to come from the top or the stem part of each leaf to add in that extra dimension and color. So just keep that in mind that you can make this layering technique with your ink a little more directional if you want, or it can be kind of very round depending on what area of the stamp you are coloring. I also just think that if you are somebody who either doesn't love coloring with markers or colored pencils, or maybe you need to just change it up sometimes. I know for me, using my Copics every single time can feel a little tedious, and I start to lose my love for them in a way. I get kind of colored out. So this is really a fun way to get that beautiful dimension and fun pop of color without having to pull out your markers. So that is my image all layered up. Super easy, super simple. I'm going to use my coordinating die, get it lined up, add a couple pieces of my Spellbinders tape just to hold it in place. I like that this isn't like a very symmetrical stamped image, so it was really easy to find those 2 little leaves that kind of stick out at the top and use that to line up my die. Sometimes those round dies really throw me off and it takes a while, so I love that this one was nice and easy to use. And then I decided when I held this up to my card base that I wanted more fluff to it. So what I'm going to do is stamp out my image one more time on a scrap of paper, not even the whole image, right? I really just want my leaves. And so I'm going to stamp it this time with that same limey green, and I'm going to stamp and ink blend it in the same color. And this is just going to help it to kind of sit into the background of our card, and it's going to literally look like extra filler in our bouquet without taking away any of the focus on the main image. I love that this is just a little bit softer, and I think that it really finishes the look that I was going for. I also thought about stamping the whole image a second time in the black and doing one in each opposite corner. You could do that too, but I really wanted to show the whole bouquet, and so this was the decision that I made. Hopefully it inspires you to maybe play with some of your stamped image as a little bit differently. Just because the set comes with one large image and the die, and doesn't mean that you have to leave it that way. You can certainly customize it to be your own kind of unique floral bunch. So this is definitely something I haven't done a lot of before, but I will be doing more in the future because I love how these, just a handful of extra leaves, bring a lot of that fullness to my bouquet. So once I cut everything with the coordinating die again, I'm going to go back in now and really quickly and not super carefully fussy cut these out. I'm just cutting around the other stamped images, kind of following whatever white space made the most sense. And I'm going to cut this little pair into 2 separate clumps just so that I can customize them even more, so wherever they're going to fit the best. And you can see I'm kind of trimming around, but honestly, I did not want to overthink this part. So I am taking some tone on tone paper from Honeybee Stamps, and we're going to use it's like a cream on cream polka dot. That's going to be our main base layer for our card. So I'm adhering that on with some Tombow dot adhesive. to my side folding A2 sized card base. That's going to be our main feature. This is when I decided that I needed a colored sentiment. So we're going to stamp that "You Are So Great" sentiment one more time, but this time we're using the Cranberry Fizz. I really wanted to pull out the red in those roses in our layered floral image. So I'm using the coordinating die to cut that out as well. And I love that it gives that little bit of white background that's going to tie into our die cut floral. Again, I'm going in with my Spellbinders tape just to hold this in place because it is such a delicate font for this sentiment that I did not want to risk it shifting around at all when I ran it through my die cutting machine. I decided I needed another pop of color on my card, so I grabbed this pink tone on tone from the same Honeybee Stamps paper pad, and I'm going to be using the stripe side this time to change up the pattern, but I trimmed that down a full inch from either side from an A2, so it's 4.5 by 3.25, and I'm popping that up with these very thin foam tape squares that I absolutely love. And once that is nice and centered, I'm going to be adhering my florals right to it, but there are a couple places where my leaves are going to be hanging off of the edge, so I'm adding the tiny version of these foam squares just to those leaves, and then I will go in with my Lawn Fawn liquid glue tube and add adhesive to the rest of my florals, as well as a dot of liquid glue to each of those tiny foam squares so that I have a minute to kind of shift and zhuzh everything around until I know that it is locked in place and I'm happy with it. Then I'll give it a nice good push and we're good to go. So the next step was adding in those filler pieces, and so I'm doing this with liquid glue and I'm tucking them under that raised panel. I think this is so fun and just adds that extra touch of dimension, and like I said, it just fills out the image a little more. And I love that these green on green leaves are just a little bit softer. I am going to go in and trim off any of these leaf bits that are hanging completely off of the card so that it still fits really nicely in my envelope. But if this is something you'd be hand delivering or tucking into a present, you could obviously skip that part and let it just really look extra fluffy and almost like a little wild flower feeling. I didn't have a ton of rhyme or reason to where I was placing these. I just knew that I wanted to kind of fill out this bouquet and really give it that hand-picked feel. So once I had all of those in place, I decided that I needed to add some shimmer. So I'm going to adhere my sentiment down with that same liquid glue, offset just a little to the side so that we're creating kind of a diagonal feel across our card. And then I grabbed the Pinkfresh Studio Peach Fuzz gems. These are stunning. They're not yellow, they're not white, they're not cream. They're just this beautiful iridescent in between warm neutral shade, and I love how this plays with that background cream color cardstock as well as the yellows and kind of this softer feeling pink red. It's not quite pink, it's not quite red. Everything just has this really fun feel to it, and I think that the shimmer in these really helps to amp that up. So I went around with my liquid glue, dotting these into place, and then that brought everything together. So I hope that you had so much fun. I hope you're feeling inspired to use one of these cool combination products where you get the stamp, the die, and the stencils. I cannot recommend it enough. Make sure that you are subscribed to the ScrapbookPal channel as well as checking out their Instagram and the blog for lots of fun new inspiration coming at you all the time. I hope that you have the most amazing day, and as always, happy crafting.